All righty, he's ready. You know how those technology issues are. Nothing ever works when you want it to. Hopefully the rest of his presentation works great because we're probably going to be really interested in it. Q's going to give us a presentation on, let's see, here it is. More advanced smartphone-like UIs using Qcontrols.
Yep. And the reason why we're having such technical difficulties is I'm presenting in a way I've never presented before. I don't have any slides. It's all 100% demo, which is exactly the opposite advice that everyone gives you. And what's really strange is you're not actually seeing my presentation like you would a normal presentation put up on the screen. I have a touch screen here that I'm going to be poking, and you're going to be able to see me do stuff and see me press the buttons. And then I have a document camera that's set up. And the original thought was, okay, I could have the document camera running on the other screen. But as soon as I plugged in the third monitor, which is the projector, which I've never been able to test with before, all of a sudden the mouse clicks started being off somewhere else. So now we've got the mouse clicks working, I think. So we'll start up here. So this presentation is completely programmed in LabVIEW, completely Active Framework. It's using Active Framework and MGI's Panel Manager. And I basically want to show you two different things. First off, everyone always complains that LabVIEW, you can't create modern user interfaces. And I want to show that that's, okay, maybe partially true, but mostly not true. The other thing is I invented a toolkit called Qcontrols a while back. And I'm going to use a lot of Qcontrols in here to help do this. So here's a lot of examples of how to use Qcontrols. What I'm not going to teach, though, is revamp the whole presentation on what Qcontrols are and how do you create one. And those presentations are recorded and out there, and you can find them. And there's going to be a lot to this presentation. And so if you see something cool and you want to know more about it, I'm planning on being here all Thursday. And like Derek said, Sam's got some rooms or something set aside. If you want, we can have a deep dive into any part of this. This is going to be completely open source eventually. And all the toolkits that I created for this are going to be given out. So first off, to introduce myself, I go by Q for both the Star Trek and the James Bond connotations. I currently work for Tesseract. I'm a certified LabVIEW architect and a LabVIEW champion. Here's my current contact information if you want to get a hold of me through Tesseract or through QSI, which is kind of my side consulting, which I don't really do anymore now that I joined Tesseract. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm also very involved in the LabVIEW community. I'm a director for Qcontrols. I'm one of the admins for the LabVIEW Wiki. Stick around for the LabVIEW Wiki quiz. We're going to be giving away $50 for first prize, $25 for second, and $10 for third for that quiz. I'm also a board member for the GLA Summit, so they asked me to put in a plug for that. The GLA Summit, the website's live now, and we're accepting presentations live now, although we're going to start soliciting for presentations starting August 1st. So you can go just get one of the flyers that I brought for the GLA. Also, I'm a member of the Active Framework Guild with Alan and Casey and several others. Casey's going to talk more about that. And then I'm active on Lava and the NI forums. And then last but not least, I have a bunch of open source out there, mostly on VIPM.io, also on GitLab. So you can go find those pretty soon. All of these animation tools that you see on this presentation is going to be published as well and given out. So first off, just a quick overview of what Qcontrols are. Qcontrols are an alternative, an object-oriented alternative to Xcontrols. And without going into it too much, they're easier than Xcontrols, and they work better than Xcontrols. And if you want to know more about that, you can hit me up after. They've also been around a while. They've been around since 2012. But they really became a package and started getting distributed in 2015. And then in 2018, it won the Community Contribution Award and works with 2015 and newer. And there's where you can find the Qcontrol toolkit if you want it. But here's a couple of examples. I have a pie chart here, and you just pass it, the magnitude of each of these little pie slices and what their name is, and that's it. And it just creates this, and you can click it, and it returns an event saying you clicked item whatever you named it. So you can then operate on it however you want. These other few that I have as examples here are not really geared for a touch screen. Like, they're really small, but you get the idea. There's a calendar. Let's see if I can pick a different month here. And then I also have a rich text box where, let's see, we can try to make the text larger, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of small here, but that's okay. And it stores kind of an HTML-like text under the hood to do that rich text box. And so if you have any questions on those, I can talk about those later, but we're going to talk about trying to create more smartphone-like UIs. Now, this is not UIs for a smartphone in LabVIEW. There's other presentations for that. This is Windows application still, but trying to use some of the smartphone design elements. For example, use standard iconography. Use swishiness. Swishiness is my very technical term for using animations to help convey information, like something's flying in and now has focus, or something was pressed, like a button, so that you know that the button was pressed. Use splitters. Limit one control per pane, and so that you can size with a pane to make your UIs more sizable. Make animations timing-based, not iteration-based. The reason why is I once programmed some really cool thing to fade in, and I had it fade in through a loop, with so many iterations, and then I took it from my really fast computer to my technician's really slow computer, and then it took 30 seconds for it to fade in. So it's better in those cases if their computer's not going to keep up, then it just essentially bypasses the animation and just goes on. Try to minimize clicks, that you don't want to use right-click menus or anything like that. You want to try to make things intuitive to find. You don't want to hide things too deep. You might not want to use too much animation because animation kind of slows things down. And one thing that, in fact, some advice, if someone says my computer's running slow, go into their Windows system and turn off animations, and they'll all of a sudden think their computer's running faster. But this presentation is about using animations. So don't make UI elements too small. For example, I think it was Alan was talking about trying to touch stuff with gloves. That's where part of this kind of concept came from for me, as I was working on a project for the Air Force where the application needed to have airmen wearing gloves on a flight line in Alaska and still be able to use the screen, and we had to make our UI elements really big so that they could do that. Don't use tab controls, at least as pages, because they're not very resizable. You could use them as a way to navigate and then have a subpanel or something change what's visible, but you don't want to use tab controls if you want to make something more resizable. And don't hide stuff in too many screens or layers. All right, so those are my guidelines. So first off, I need to talk about some animation basics. Easing functions is a way to specify a rate of change so things flow more naturally. If it's just linear, you can see my button just sort of moves along. But if I come in and I change something to like this one, you can see it starts off slow and then gets fast. Some of these other ones down here, the rate of change is a little bit more pronounced. So you can make things flow a little better. And then you can get in some really fun ones like this one where it goes back a little bit and then bounces. or some of these other ones, like this one's really fun. You can elastic it, boing, boing. Where this one's really fun, like this one, you can make it bounce. You can do that with a button just by animating the position in a loop. So this toolkit for easing functions I'm going to publish and you can use, and then basically you just put in, I want my starting position to be this, I want my ending position to be this, and I want it to take this much time. Go. And so you can do that with position, you can do that with size. So, and then I also have a different one. Let's see, one moment. We'll see if my sound will work for this, we'll see. I also have a jiggle button here. Oh, you can't hear it, darn. We'll turn my volume way up so we can at least try. So I have my button giggle and then run away. So those are the easing functions, and that's going to be a toolkit that I'm going to publish on vipm.io that you'll be able to use. For the rest of this presentation, and like this menu that keeps popping out, you can see that I've used those easing functions as it pops out and comes back in. I also have a swipe menu. If you know who that is, then you have little kids. That's Swiper from Dora the Explorer. But here's my swipe menu. I can move it back and forth. It has a slow down function. So if I let go, it will slow down and stop. If I go too far, it does kind of that elastic pull back. And then when I snap back, it actually lets go and snaps back. So here's on the other side. So in order to do that, I actually have some code. This is basically my you're not going to be able to see it, but that's okay. I can show this to you more in depth later if you'd like to see it. But this is the event handler that's inside of a Qcontrol. And so in here, I have another toolkit, which is kind of the blue banner icons you're seeing. That is a swipe toolkit. And this is something else I'm going to distribute for everyone. And this is handling all of the init, the starts and stops, the finishes, the slowdowns, the snapback, all of that stuff. And so here's it init so that it can track the mouse. Here's where it's starting, getting kind of the initial state. And then right here is where it calculates like the instantaneous velocity so that it knows how to slow down and that sort of thing. When it overshoots, it uses one of the easing functions to do a drag. That's the purple banner icon right there. Then the slowdown shows right here in the timeout. There's a slowdown function that basically controls the rate at which it slows down right here. And it has two different slowdown rates. One, if it's overshot, then it slows down faster than if it hasn't overshot. So that if you were to flick it fast and it overshoots, it slows down a lot faster and then springs back. The spring back routine is not right there for some reason. Well, and then the selection routine. So this also has selection, so I can come in here and say, okay, gdevcon NA select, and of course it came up on my other screen and I'm not connected to the internet, but it pops open all the websites. So I did that just as an added functionality for fun, but unfortunately that's not showing because I'm not connected. So that's a menu bar with swipe. That's a Qcontrol that I also am going to publish for everyone. Okay, let's see. UI elements, this comes from a presentation that's there at the bottom, which you can't see very well anyway. I'll have to let you get this later, but this graphic designer said, these are 32 elements that a common user interface for a smartphone would have. Some of these things I'm going to go over more in depth. Some of them you've seen, like an accordion. Well, the definition of an accordion is essentially just having information hidden off screen and being able to have it pop out, like this hamburger menu bar here. A bento box, that's what you would picture the menu on your phone with all the icons, just like a bento box, in Japanese cuisine. Breadcrumb. Breadcrumb basically is going to navigate through and tell you where you've been. This is being a little slow, but here, this is just getting what's on my computer. I'm going to drill down to my code, my presentation, smartphone, breadcrumb screen, all this code that I wrote for this presentation because I'm crazy. And you can see that on the top, it is showing where I've been. And I can come back up to the top and I can click, I want to go back to Smartphonelike UIs. And then it took me back to that folder. If I drill down again, right here, it's now too long to show all my breadcrumbs. So I can click on this and pop up a little dialog and say, I want to go back to my C drive, and there it is. So think of this if you're navigating through lots of screens, or you're navigating through settings or something like that. It gives an easy way for your users to snap back to a certain point. I also made it so that you can change what delimiter you use. Let's make it a little bit deeper so you can see that better. So there's just a pipe, there's backslash, // Really, you can, for this Q control, you can just give it any string that you want to use as a delimiter, as long as it's not something it's going to confuse with the actual text. So some of these other things that you've seen the buttons. I guess you can't really see that text very well. Right here it says button, you've seen buttons, card. Card is like what I showed on my front screen when I had the pop out showing different information about me. Carousel, I thought about programming one of these but ran out of time. That's when you can swipe through pictures. You can kind of do it on one of my examples I'm going to show in just a minute. Checkboxes, you see that, comments. A donor menu is just like a hamburger menu, but it's kind of shaped where it's in a V. And what that is meant for is to say that you're gonna do a filter or something like that. It's a filter menu. Drop downs, you know what those are. The hamburger menu, that's this, where it looks like a little hamburger with a bun and a hamburger in the middle. Usually that is used to denote navigation. And so a lot of people know that that means that there's more navigation to go on. A kebab menu is like having meatballs on a kebab. Maybe it's like the ellipsis, the ... You've seen that before on apps. That usually is used to denote there's more settings or more options. Let's go to icons. Here's a resource that you guys can get. The Open Icon Library is a free, royalty-free library. This is some of the icons from that. And then for all of this artwork and stuff that I did, these are all my favorite graphic programs. So Paint.net is kind of like a free version of Photoshop. Has a lot of plugins like Photoshop for special effects and stuff that you can download. Icon 8 Lunacy. This is a vector graphic program to let you do SVGs and stuff, just like Inkscape. But I find Inkscape hard to use, and Lunacy was really easy to use. So my opinion is I like Lunacy. Figma is a really interesting program. It's all online and it is free. There are paid parts or add-ons you can get to it. But Figma is what a lot of graphic designers use to design out web pages and the interfaces between web pages. This would be an interesting program to use more to start designing out your UX for your application, because you can actually map out with wire diagrams and all sorts of stuff and actually make the navigation work. GIMP's another free one that is a lot like Photoshop. Canva, my daughter told me I had to put this one in. I've never used it, but from what I understand, that's what a lot of people use to make like their Instagram posts and their Facebook posts and the banner kind of thing. So, and then Blender, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that of Blender before, but that's a free open source 3D animation software, and it's pretty robust, and I've only scratched the surface of it. I hardly know how to do anything in that. When I do publish this, and you do get this, if you were to click on open in browser and then click on any of these, it would open it up for you. So input field. Okay, so I have two examples here of doing inputs. I have the Windows on-screen keyboard. This is nice, but you open up the on-screen keyboard and you can type something in here. So we'll type hello world. Oops, if I can spell. I'm an engineer, so I can't. It's by definition. So there's hello world. And the on-screen keyboard's great. You can get to it with the Control Windows O, which is how my button is activating it, is just by doing that hotkey. And it's resizable and stuff. The keys are a bit small, but otherwise it's pretty good. You can do hotkeys, control, paste, and all that stuff. But maybe you want to do a built-in keyboard, and Matt will kind of recognize this because I patterned this off of one that we use at Hill. But this is an on-screen keyboard. You can do the same thing, but it is more integrated. So if you had something that you wanted to keep locked down so they couldn't have access to the operating system, you could kind of roll your own. So hello world, enter. Another thing that's nice about rolling your own is you can make up other types of keyboards. Like I want to have a numeric keyboard. Turn to page 394. Anyone get that reference? No? You guys are all fired. It's from Harry Potter, of course, because it's me. Another thing is you can have integration into other things, like I want to change this and I want to delete that field from my multi-com list box and type something else. Let's go. And there we go. Oh, I typed let go. Let's fix that. Let's see. We'll just select all of that. Cut, delete. See, and I also integrated paste. Woohoo! There we go. So when you think of doing user input on a touch screen, you might want to consider, do I just want to use the built-in one, or do I want to roll my own? And the ones that I created after I polish them up a little bit, I'll probably publish those too. All right, loaders. Loaders or throbbers are a UI element that you use when you have a non-deterministic time that something's going to get done. Normally you could just do a progress bar, but that's more deterministic. Like I know it's going to take a certain amount of time, or it's got so many files left, or something like that. One problem with, one way to do a throbber is to do an animated GIF. Now, animated GIFs you can just copy and paste into LabVIEW. But I've noticed, and actually when I was preparing for this presentation, the newer animated GIFs crash LabVIEW for some reason. I don't know why. If you get really old ones, like I had a collection of, like these, they work fine for some reason. But some of them are going to look better on light screens versus dark screens and stuff like that. And I actually had a situation, I don't know if Matt remembers this or not, when I was working at Hill Air Force Base, I put a throbber on something as an animated GIF, and it worked fine. And then they decided to lock down the operating system, and whatever mechanism makes animated GIFs run didn't work anymore, and now a big black box appeared where my animated GIF was. So I ended up having to come up with something else, and I ended up making a Qcontrol that basically has every frame of the picture in a picture ring, and then it just animates through that. And that works despite the lockdown of the Windows stuff. So, all right, let's move on. Meatball menu is kind of the same thing as kebab menus, just, actually I think the kebab menu is vertical and the meatball is horizontal. I don't know, something like that. But, okay, modal. You guys all know with modal dialogues, if they get lost in the Z stack and then you're stuck and then you just have to kill stuff. So, you notice on a lot of smartphone applications, instead of it being modal where you click on it and opens and you can't click off of it, unless you click on the X or on OK. You can't dismiss that dialog box. Now, they don't always have to have a picture of a cat, but of course, this one does have to have one, of course. Okay, so I press the OK button, but this one's a dismissible dialog box. And like my cat is sleeping outside of his bed, you can also click outside of this to dismiss it. So, and the way that you can do that, it's really cool. It is actually a event that you can unlock if you turn on the super secret special whatever stuff, because it's a private one, but it's called VI deactivation. And what that does is it tells that VI what VIs have been deactivated. And you just basically compare it and say, well, am I the VI that got deactivated? And if you are, that means it lost focus, and then you can dismiss it. So I'll click on it one more time. I could click OK or cancel, but if I click on the outside of it, that dismisses the dialog box too. So notifications, we all know what notifications look like. Pagination, if you're trying to go through a large thing, you might want to paginate so that it only displays so many items at once. I'm going to skip those and go to picker. So a picker are better than an input field because you can lock down what options they have, but it might be better than like a drop-down list or something because a picker's real estate is a lot smaller. So here I have the date. I'm going to swipe through this and just pick like the 28th. Oh, that didn't react the way that I wanted on my calendar, but that's okay. We'll just go pick another date here. And now my calendar got it. So here's October 28th, 2028, and my calendar updated. And I want to tell my calendar to go back to today, and that's going to update those pickers back to where they go. I told it to set it to Colorado by default, but I'm from Utah, so I'm going to try to get it down to Utah. Of course, I'm all the way at the bottom. Oh, I passed it. Okay, there we go. Utah. All right, Utah, and then United States. We can go through all the countries, but so I got a list of all the countries. I lived in Thailand for 2 years, so we'll pick Thailand. All right, so that's an example of a picker. What's nice is you can populate those from a database or a file or something like that and make it a lot easier. I'm not going to talk through the rest of these, but some of the other ones, progress bar, you guys know, radio button, search fields, sidebar. That's kind of like what this is showing is a sidebar, navigation bar, tab bar, all sorts of things. So if you want to learn more about those different elements, I suggest you visit that web page. All right, oops, let's see. Let's move on to multi-touch. So everything that I've done so far has been just regular LabVIEW, mouse clicks taken as, or touches taken as mouse clicks. LabVIEW doesn't have support for multi-touch, but Windows does through the Windows Message Touch and Windows Message Gesture. So I tried for like 3 weeks to try to figure out how to write the .NET stuff in order to get this to work. And then I threw up my hands and I went to Aldredge. And they have a toolkit called the Touchscreen Toolkit and here's where you can find it. And they basically utilize being able to capture the Windows touch gestures. And they have a couple of DLLs that they wrote, and that passes that information into LabVIEW, and then you can do lots of cool stuff with that. Although, why would you want to use it? Well, here's one example is for safety. Let's pretend you've designed a system that the person has to put something into a machine, and you want to make sure that both of their hands are clear before you shut the door and do whatever operation on that unit under test is. Well, here I have 2 buttons. I can't reach with one hand. There's no way to press it with one hand. So I can touch it with both hands. If I let go with any hand, it realizes that and stops my countdown. But if I keep it held down for 5 seconds, then it's going to start my machine up and we're off and running. So there's one reason why you might want to use multi-touch. One thing that's interesting with Aldredge's toolkit, though, is it circumvents touches from being called mouse clicks anymore after you register it. But there is a method in their toolkit to turn that on and off. So that's why I have this other mouse button here, is I have to basically say, okay, stop having multi-touch take over the mouse clicks so that I can click on to the next one. Otherwise, it wouldn't let me unless I registered every button that I wanted in my whole application. So now I have another example of using their toolkit, and in order to enable that again, I have to pick one of my toolbar tools up here. So of course, being a Harry Potter fan, I had to show all of my Harry Potter pictures from the times I got to go there this year. So swiping so this is kind of like a carousel, but a carousel would kind of have a little bit more animation to it where it's actually showing it move, which I didn't have time to do for this example. But here we're going to zoom in on that 9 3/4. So I'm going to switch to zoom, and I'm going to zoom in. And one thing I hadn't fixed yet either is to actually have it zoom in on the coordinate that I started on, but that's okay. We'll just turn on pan, and we'll pan over to it. And pan has got 2 fingers close together. That's how you do the pan. And then you can do the rotate too. So we'll rotate it around. So that's doing all the multi-touch stuff in order to do this using their toolkit. I ended up having to rewrite a few things in their toolkit, so they're going to get some free feedback when I'm done with this, but that's some cool things you can do with their multi-touch toolkit. Then I have to turn this off to turn off the multi-tool to come here. Last little bit, here's my wish list of things that I wish LabVIEW would improve so that we can make better interface or user interfaces. One, handle vector graphics. Right now, there isn't really an easy way to handle vector graphics, especially SVGs, and that would be really nice to not have things so pixelated sometimes. Have a high resolution picture control. Well, replace the picture control entirely, really. Right now, it's really hard to open any pictures really large. I had to size all of my pictures down because when I tried to open those pictures up just normal, memory error, out of memory problems, because it's trying to keep those as big, huge, gigantic arrays. Easier responsive design. Now, yeah, we can make things more resizable by doing splitters and doing the one control per pane so that they'll resize with the pane and that sort of thing. But that doesn't make it so that it does the easy stack up stuff like we saw with the G web development when you want it to be like for a mobile interface or something like that. That's something that needs to be added. Programmatically changeable buttons. Right now, you can't change the decals on a button programmatically, and that would actually be really nice to do, actually. Also, to be able to have those buttons be able to use SVGs or anything like that. Make decorations easier to work with the VI server. Right now, if you want to work with any decorations, it's a big, long array, and it's hard to know which decoration is which because it's based in that array based on when you place down the decoration. So it would be nice to be able to move decorations around and do stuff with the VI server too, but it's really hard to do. Make tab controls act more like panes so that they're easier to use. Handle multi-touch gestures as regular events. Cursors don't work in subpanels. And the reason why is a cursor, when you mess with the cursors, it tries to go get a handle to the window, at least the Windows version does. I don't know what it does in Mac or Linux, but it tries to go get a handle to the window. Well, if your VI is running in a subpanel, there is no handle to that window because it doesn't exist as a window. So your cursor VIs will fail. Fixed coordinates in subpanels. I don't know if you've ever tried to map like a pop-up dialog to show up at a specific place over a control that's in a VI, that's in a subpanel. It's really hard to do because you can't map the screen coordinates all the way to the panel coordinates. It's all thrown off by that extra offset from wherever that subpanel is sitting. Windows transparency. I have an actual idea exchange idea to go make it so that you can make Windows, certain parts of it transparent. So like you can have splash screens that aren't just rectangular. Make controls and indicators transparent as well. So then you could make all sorts of fun UI stuff by being able to either fade in, fade out controls or stuff like that. And also, there's no way to change the Z order of a control. This is something that they've said in the ID Exchange that they're working on, but it's currently on hold. So, go like it again so that they'll revive it. And the one thing that made my program hard, if I go back to the introduction screen, I had to hide these when I popped things open and then re-show them. You can kind of see there's a momentary blip where it's not visible. If I could change the Z order, that would be all right. I wouldn't have to hide them. I would just change the thing I wanted to be up front. But I noticed when I first made these cards, as soon as I opened one, all of a sudden my other buttons were still sitting there because this card was behind the other cards. So the Z order change would be nice. So all of that, I mean, there was a lot to see here, and I kind of went through it fast. I probably used about 30 different Qcontrols I programmed for this. I programmed way too much stuff. In Alan's words, I'm a dork because I programmed the whole thing rather than using a slideshow. But I wanted to show you that the whole thing is the demo. The whole thing is a user interface that is designed to be flowing and to convey the information I wanted to convey and to hopefully be intuitive. Hopefully I used pretty intuitive iconography to say what I wanted to say. So if you want to see more of this, want to see any of the code, I'm totally open to that later. But now we'll open up to as many questions as we have time. Couple.
I feel like sometimes if I know what I want a control to look like, I can kind of get there. If I want a custom element, what maybe in your experience have you found as good resources to figure that out in the first place, to design a good UI? Or I mean, I look for examples, but do you have any other thoughts on that, on how to come up with a good plan in the first place?
Well, try to steal it from somewhere else. Do lots of web searching. You can hire a UI expert or a UX expert, an actual graphic designer. I know most of us don't have that luxury, so we kind of are makeshift graphic designers too. I consider myself a hobbyist graphic designer because I did take a couple of classes in college for fun, but that's the extent of my education in graphic design. One benefit to me right now is my daughter that just graduated from high school is going into graphic design. So I always pull her in and say, I need some help, come critique this. But otherwise, you're gonna have to Google and see, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. What is the common user interface for trying to do something like that? Does that make sense?
So first off, this looks great. Thanks for doing this. You said you're planning on packaging these into stuff that's available on VIPM or whatever. What exactly, can you talk a little bit more about what that would contain and like what is you get out of the box versus what you have to do under the hood to get it to the state?
I might have to show you more of the source offline, but all of these easing functions that are in this list, I have a library that I'm going to publish that's all of those. And now my touchscreen isn't working, but whatever. But all those that are in the list, that's going to be one package. And some examples on how to use those. Included in that package with all of those is animations for just being able to do the position changes and stuff like that. And also do some other things like the jiggle buttons, fade in, fade out of VIs, some other things like that. The other toolkit is the swipe, those VIs, and an example of how to do that. That will be one. And then all of those individual Qcontrols that I created for this, I'll package each into its own that can be consumed and used in other applications. So each Qcontrol can be standalone, except for they'll probably need the animation toolkit. They might need the swipe toolkit, and then they obviously need the full Qcontrol toolkit in order to run as dependencies.
We got.
Okay, looks like there's one more by you there, Jeff.
How do you handle performance concerns? Because obviously a lot of these involve some pretty compute intensive operations. Have you had it where you added all these cool animations and then later have to strip them all out when you run into a performance problem?
Well, I haven't really used these that much in a mainstream application other than my presentation. I've used a few, but the way really that I combat that is, like I said, make your animations timing based, not iteration based. Then if you say this thing should only take 500 milliseconds and more than 500 milliseconds passes, it just, like let's say it's a fade in. You want to fade in a dialog box. If you do it by timing and for some reason the computer is a slower computer and it takes more than 500 milliseconds to load, then it's just going to pop open rather than displaying the animation at all. If you did do it through iteration based, like my mistake, then you're going to get this really slow fade in thing maybe because of performance issues. It's a trade-off though. I did a whole lot of animations. Maybe you only want to do a few to make it emphasize something like warning, you might want to have a jiggle or something, you know, I don't know. It's just kind of, this is just kind of to open your mind that there are options out there. So, alrighty, I think that's all we had time for. Awesome. If you want to see any more of this, come find me. I'm willing to stay after Thursday and talk it as deep as you want to go. So, all right, thank you.